are talking Don't Suck. This is a 2023 horror comedy. Horror with very loose affiliations to the word. And this one stars up-and-coming comedian Matt Rife along with Jamie Kennedy. And we effectively have a story which is kind of like a road trip film, I suppose, where we have two comedians, a kind of veteran and experienced comedian, Pete, played by Jamie Kennedy, who's kind of disillusioned, feeling he should have done better with his life, etc., etc. And then we have this kind of new ingenue kind of type comedian played by Matt Rife, whose gimmick is that he's a kind of a vampire. But the thing is, he might really be a vampire, but everyone's kind of just assuming that he is kind of like playing a character, so to speak. And he's like not particularly good, not particularly confident, and effectively talks Jamie Kennedy's character into becoming his kind of like opening act by saying he'll effectively bankroll everything, but he just wants the experience. So it's these guys going across the country and then kind of like finding fame, really, because it comes out that, yes, Matt Rife's character Ethan really is a vampire. So what will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So let's discuss what I think works in this movie. One thing I would say is the characters aren't particularly enthralling, and we'll come on to that. But one character who I really did enjoy was played by Ellen Holman, who you may know as Saxa from the TV show Spartacus, and she plays Jamie Kennedy's girlfriend, but she actually has some quite funny lines. And I have to say, some of her kind of jokes, even though they felt a little bit more off the cuff, they just hit a little better than the kind of the two more experienced kind of comedians. And I just liked her character. She seemed a lot more. She hasn't got a huge amount of screen time, but just a kind of a fun character who had some quite well delivered kind of funny lines and actually had some interesting kind of character traits. So I liked her. Now, as comedy goes as a whole, there are a few jokes where I think were reasonably funny here. This primarily being a comedy film, I would expect it to be a little funnier than it was, I won't lie. But there are still a couple of jokes here that I thought were quite funny. There's also, especially, I think there's a few funny lines aimed at kind of vampire mythology, especially things like Twilight, because Matt Rife, as a kind of a comedian slash actor, is, somewhat of a pretty boy. Everyone's kind of referring to him like Edward Cullen and things like that, which I kind of found, it's kind of funny and things. There's a couple of okay kind of moments there. VFX wise, there's not a lot in this, I won't lie. Like I've said, this is a horror comedy only by virtue of the fact that it is a vampire film, I suppose. So, and there is kind of one sort of kill scene, I suppose, but it's nothing too gratuitous. But the effects were okay, they were alright for a kind of a low budget movie. And it's kind of nice to see this kind of like growing relationship, this kind of buddy relationship between these kind of two guys there, as their relationship kind of changes through the kind of the course of the movie. That was all kind of quite good. But what doesn't work, I mean, ultimately this movie is going to live or die by its funniness, its comedy, and how much you've laughed in this movie. Now, comedy by its kind of nature is subjective, so obviously not everyone is going to find everything funny. But I have to be honest with you, I found this movie particularly low on laughs. Let me just put it like that. It's not a particularly kind of funny movie. Now, I had seen a few Matt Rife videos before watching this on kind of YouTube and stuff. I wasn't familiar with him before 2023, but I'd seen a few, and he's pretty good. He seems to kind of really revel in the kind of like in the spur of the moment sort of style kind of comedy, whilst here it's obviously more scripted. It really doesn't hit. And the same thing with Jamie Kennedy. Again, there's a few jokes here and there that I think land, but for the most part, I didn't find this particularly a funny film. That you get a wry smile every now and then, but it's just not funny. Also, I have to be honest with you, Matt Rife, his acting isn't brilliant. He's playing a character at the beginning who is quite sort of awkward and sort of like dreary, and I understand that's what the character is saying. But his presence really, I think it's actually, I'd go so far as to say this undercuts Matt Rife as a comedian. He's just not good in it. He's very, very wooden. So you know, I understand the character is meant to be awkward, but this is just like the delivery of it is just not very good. And even Jamie Kennedy's character, he seems to play very much a kind of a version of what you've kind of seen before. But his star is definitely on the wane, sadly. So you haven't really got riveting kind of performances here. Let's talk about the story. The story really isn't much of one at all, if I'm honest. It's just these guys, you know, and they're changing of relationship as the movie goes on. But you never really feel it has much in the way of pathos or anything like that, or real kind of like depth of narrative or anything. It's a very, very light on story, and you know, we get a kind of a few exchanges about vampire mythology and how it kind of relates to this kind of movie and stuff. There's not a lot in regards to kind of narrative. Ultimately, it's a kind of an excuse to go from one comedy show to the next, and then have these kind of jokes. And we see kind of Ethan's star, played by Matt Rife, kind of rise because of his kind of vampire shtick. And in regards to the actual kind of horror elements to it, like I said, it's really kind of played down. They could have had a much more interesting kind of B storyline where, you know, he's having to feed, he's having to kind of like sort of kill people or do something with it. But it's just kind of like, it's barely there, it barely registers. It's almost not worth even having him as a vampire, because it actually has very little on-screen kind of impact on the actual film. It's just kind of seems like a bit of a waste of an opportunity where it could have been incorporated so much better and integrated into the actual narrative with a lot more kind of going on with it. As it stands at the moment, it's just kind of like, it comes up a few times and that's kind of it. So ultimately, this movie is incredibly dull. And for what should be a horror comedy, it fails on both of those parts. Not only that, the acting's poor and the characters are quite frankly a little unlikable when you don't really root behind them. So it's a bit of a failure, if you ask me. I have to say I was quite surprised in how bad this was. If I'm honest, you know, it was just like, yeah, this is pretty bad. And considering again, like Matt Rife was really a kind of quite a prominent comedy star in 2023, it's surprising this has come out. I'm giving this a 3 out of 10, and I have to say I think I'm being generous with that. It's a 3 out of 10. Have you seen it? Please do let me know what your thoughts are on it if you have seen it, and I shall look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.